Should Sheikh Hasina resign? Bangladesh is no stranger to protests, but with tens of thousands still on the streets and a growing list of demands, will pressure on the Awami League force a new election? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Bangladesh. Over the course of a few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Bangladeshis have hit the streets, accusing the government of everything from economic mismanagement to vote rigging, and even the detention and torture of political opponents. Demonstrators are demanding a fresh election and a caretaker government to take charge until a vote is held. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her ruling Awami League party have refused and say it is the opposition that's destabilizing the country and straining the economy to grab power. Here's a look.
Political tension in Bangladesh is at boiling point. After months of anti-government protests, tens of thousands of people marched the streets of Dhaka on December 10th. Hundreds were jailed, many facing what are widely considered politically motivated charges.
I am a victim of oppression, but I could not express this to anyone. I came here today to protest against those responsible for my current situation.
The rally in the capital was organized by the main opposition, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. It accuses the government of failing to address soaring fuel prices and the rising cost of living. It's galvanized the people's anger and focused it on Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, calling for her to step down and make way for a caretaker government to hold elections.
We are protesting against the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. She and her government are torturing our supporters all over the country, and today thousands of us have gathered here against her. I believe her autocratic government will fall very soon.
But the government says the opposition is destabilizing the country by encouraging people to gather illegally. To clear the streets, authorities have resorted to use of force. Amnesty International issued a statement saying, in recent weeks, we have seen an alarming escalation of repression by the authorities, who are carrying out mass arrests of political activists, raising serious concerns about violence, intimidation, and harassment. Thousands of opposition supporters have been arrested at rallies across the country, along with two senior leaders of the BNP. The BNP has also demanded the release of its party chief and former Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia, who has been in jail since 2018 after being convicted on 2 counts of corruption. Meanwhile, the South Asian nation is battling an economic crisis. Despite being one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, the attacks in Ukraine have forced the government to suspend gas and diesel imports, driving up the cost of living in the country.
It has become unbearable to maintain the standard of living. Prices have become so high that it is out of reach for commoners. If we go to market with 500 taka, that barely covers our needs. It is difficult to live this life, and you can't say this to anyone.
The UN has also expressed concern over the political tensions in Bangladesh. And with another mass rally planned this month and no sign of solution, the fragile economy is on the line.
So will Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League bow to pressure on the street? Or is Bangladesh better off with some political continuity until a scheduled election a year from now? Joining me now to debate that and more are here in the studio, Bakr Molla. He is the EU and UK spokesperson of the Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami party and a BNP ally. From Dhaka, we have Amir Khasru Mahmud Chowdhury. He is a standing committee member of the BNP and the former commerce minister. Also from the Bangladeshi capital is Shah Ali Farhad, a former advisor to Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. And from Washington, Michael Kugelman. He's the director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute. Michael, I'm going to start with you because I want an analyst's perspective on just how consequential these protests are, plus the crackdown, plus the arrests. Could they all prove to be something greater and actually have this government change, or can they just ride this out?
Well, I think that we have to look to two signposts. One are a series of key dates. December 24th is a date when the opposition plans to hold countrywide protests, and as I understand it, December 30th is another key date when the opposition plans to hold protests. So we'll have to see how large those protests are, and we'll have to see how the government responds. That'll be one indication of how consequential these elections, these protests are. The second point is the factor that really triggered to a great extent this crisis for the government, and that is the economy. As you know, Bangladesh's economy had been in a pretty good place over the last few years, but in recent months we've seen, many of the macroeconomic stress points that we've seen in other countries around the world: high inflation, energy shortages, and so on. I think that we have to see in the coming weeks, how does the government try to handle the economic crisis? And as you know, Andrea, sometimes when governments face economic crises, they have to take steps that may be economically prudent but could also be politically costly, like price hikes, which is something that this government has already done. So that's another thing I'll be watching, is what happens with the economy. That'll go a long way toward determining if the opposition can maintain this momentum that's been able to carry it over the last few months.
Right. Shah Farhad, let me turn to you, because we know these protests initially started with economic grievances. But you believe that these now are not anti-government protests, but rather political rallies that are actually just disrupting people's lives as well as the economy. Still, though, I have to ask you, this level of suppression that human rights groups have actually been verifying, why do you think it's necessary? And politically, do you fear what it could cost you?
Well, Andrea, thank you for having me, firstly. These rallies that we are discussing today have been purely political programs on part of BNP. There have been 10 such rallies all around divisional cities in Bangladesh, and there is no evidence to suggest that there is any mass participation of the people in this protest. They have basically been comprised of workers and leaders and activists of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and their allies. Now, the economic issues are quite serious. Bangladesh is feeling the pressure on some of its key macroeconomic indicators, principally stemming from the fallout of the pandemic, as well as the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which has led to rising import costs, especially of energy. And I guess people would rather not have this crisis at this moment, but I do not believe that the people of Bangladesh have the confidence of BNP to do anything about it. I mean, at the end of the day, the fact remains in Bangladesh that on today's date, the people of Bangladesh have still trust on Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her government to deliver, as they have delivered over the last decade, both economically and wise. Now, the question of suppression is something. Now, the question of suppression is something that is out of the question for the government. It believes in the right of the freedom of assembly and speech of the opposition. The fact that BNP has been able to hold 10 major rallies in 10 divisional cities within a span of a couple of months shows that the government is on board with the fact that they have the right to exercise these freedoms. But the only exception that we feel under the Constitution, that we are mandated to act when there is a public security risk involved. So there has been no major incident in the 9 divisional cities before Dhaka. The only reason the Dhaka protests became such heated is because of some very irresponsible statements coming from top leadership of the BNP, such as some of their leaders, including their central leader, Amanullah Aman, came on media and bragged that from December 10th, Bangladesh will be run by the diktats of Khaleda Zia and Tariq Rahman. Now, as you know, Tariq Rahman is currently a fugitive living in London, having been convicted of multiple criminal cases, including for attempted murder and also for money laundering. And they are saying that this convicted fugitive will be running Bangladesh from December 10th. Now, when BNP gives a warning, the government takes it seriously because their past record shows that their activities, which are so-called political, can often turn to extreme violence, as we saw in 2013 and 14 surrounding the 10th parliamentary elections, but also surrounding the war crimes trial that Bangladesh had from 2010 onwards, especially in 2013, when actually BNP's ally Jamaat-e-Islami led the violence, but BNP participated quite spontaneously in that.
Okay.
So whenever public security has risk, that's when the government will step in. Otherwise, the government is pretty okay with having these rights exercised by the opposition.
Okay. Well, let me ask Jamaat-e-Islami, Abu Bakr Molla, you're here with me in the studio. When you hear the government and their supporters say that they're actually saving the country from parties like yours because you're a destabilizing force, you bring violence to Bangladesh and what should be peaceful protests, what do you say?
Thank you very much for having me here. The Awami League representative can claim whatever they want to claim, but what about the international human rights community are saying? They are independent, they are neutral. International human rights community, major international human rights community has given statements saying that human rights are being grossly violated in Bangladesh. Criminal justice are being used to punish opposition members, and there is no democratic rights, and there are no human rights of freedom of assembly and association. People have their democratic rights to go to the street, to exercise their rights, which is confirmed by the Constitution. But are they getting their democratic rights? What he said is that BNP and the ally has got their democratic rights, it has exercised. But what about BNP's top leader was arrested the night before the 10th of December rally in Dhaka. And Jamaat leader, the chief of Jamaat, Dr. Shafiqur Rahman, Jamaat being a democratic political party, once Jamaat Amir supported that they will be with BNP for calling restoration of a caretaker system in Bangladesh, and they will be supporting BNP in the movement. Within 2 days of supporting BNP for restoring caretaker system and calling for resignation of Sheikh Hasina's, the undemocratic and unelected prime minister, he was arrested on what? On falsely accusing of supporting and promoting terrorism and extremism. Jamaat, since the very beginning of its formation, Jamaat is committed to democracy. And Awami League, his parties, the party in power, they were ally of Jamaat-e-Islami in the street for caretaker system, the very institution what we are fighting for, BNP and Jamaat now. Awami League was an ally of Jamaat for the caretaker system during 91 to 96. And because of Jamaat and Awami League's joint movement, the caretaker system was installed in the constitution, which was removed by the ruling regime using their power.
Okay, Shah Ali Farhad, I will let you a quick response, please, because I could see you shaking your head. Go ahead.
Just for the record, Awami League has never been an ally of Jamaat-e-Islami. Awami League has never had any joint programs or joint movement with Jamaat-e-Islami. The fact that in 1996, the demand of the two parties matched does not denote an alliance or a friendship or a partnership. Bangladesh Awami League has always been a secular left-of-center party. Jamaat-e-Islami is standing for war crimes committing in 1971 and very ultra-right-wing Islamist politics in Bangladesh since then. It can never be allies or partners because they are poles apart.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you, but I need to get Amir Chowdhury in the conversation here. I apologize for taking this long. And I need to ask you specifically about the prospect of a caretaker government, which seemed to work well enough for Bangladesh in the past. It's now in the hands of the Supreme Court, from what we understand. I mean, is this really the best way to settle the issue and then move on to a new election? And do you think the government will even accept a decision, if it comes to this, to hand over power to the caretaker government that's being demanded?
As a matter of fact, to understand this clearly, you have to go back to why the caretaker government came into effect in Bangladesh. It was the demand of ruling Awami regime and Jamaat-e-Islami together to have a caretaker government because there was a trust deficit among political parties. And BNP was in power at that time, and BNP decided, having respect to the consensus for a caretaker government in the country, BNP decided to pass in the parliament and incorporated caretaker government in the constitution of Bangladesh, and BNP resigned after that and went into election under caretaker government. and lost the election. But we accepted it gracefully because it was to show respect to the citizens of the country. And election was held under caretaker government, which was free and fair, no question asked. Then subsequently, when Awami League came to power, Sheikh Hasina was having an idea of changing the caretaker government or do away with the caretaker government. She constituted a parliamentary party with the members of Awami League. The parliamentary party came out with the decision that they should go for caretaker government. Then it went to the court. The matter went to the court. The court appointed 9 amicus curiae with the senior jurist of the country.
Okay.
Out of 9,
before we
8
go,
amicus curiae. No, I'm just because you have got to understand the concept of caretaker government.
yes.
Out of 9, 8 amicus curiae was in favor of caretaker government. Then when the judgment came,
Right,
the short judgment,
we're concerned with the timing here. I just need to ask you then, what now? I mean, if your demand is for a caretaker government and a fresh election, let me ask you, moving forward, what do you think that would bring? Shah Ali says the people don't have the confidence in your party, in the BNP. So ask them, why won't they hold an election? Let's find out what the public really thinks. Do you think you'll get that demand?
Well, the test of pudding is in eating. You see, if the Awami League is so confident about their winning the election, the best thing to do is to go for a free and fair election under a caretaker government, for which there was a national consensus, and there still is. And in that national election, I can assure you, Awami League will be defeated, decimated, and they know it so well. That is why they want to hold on to power through one after another stolen election. And it is well known globally and in Bangladesh. Last 2-3 elections were stolen by Awami League, and they want to continue in power with more and more stolen election in the future, and they're afraid to face the citizen of the country. I can assure you, they know it only too well, and they want to be in power through abduction, through killing, through extrajudicial killing, through custodial death, and through false and fabricated cases. 4 million people, opposition leadership, 4 million opposition leadership is facing false and fabricated cases, dying under custodial death, extrajudicial killing, and forced disappearance. So this is the party which is holding on to power through oppression, repression. You just look at the human rights report. You look at the report on the
we have. I mean, let me ask our analyst then here, Michael. We know the human rights reports right now are generally on the opposition side as far as any abuses of power they've seen, but that would be consistent with the government that is in power, having the power to call on security forces to do what they've demanded they've done so far. Still, would an election actually solve this problem? It seems like an easy enough ask. If there's this much public discontent at present, why is a new election not called? Why is the caretaker government not being reinstalled from a decade ago?
Well, I mean, this is, of course, a government, a ruling party that's been in power for 3 consecutive terms. And indeed, it is true, as was noted before, that each of the elections that the Awami League has won have been contested, and there have been some pretty credible allegations from respected election monitors and human rights groups abroad that they weren't free and fair. And so it strikes me that this is not a government that would be inclined to try to be willing to give in to demands of the opposition, especially when it would come to giving up power early. So I think it's on. I mean, we could talk about whether the ruling party should agree to the public mandate or something like that, but it's hard to gauge that as well. It's true that we have had these pretty significant protests for several months, but it is true that so far as I know, they haven't really spread to become really nationwide sustained protests. And they typically, they are drawing on opposition party members. So I think that we'd have to have a different conversation if we were to see widespread sustained protests where people that are not formally affiliated with one of the opposition parties were to come out and join. And again, that depends on factors like the economy and how much worse the economy gets. But to answer your question, I think it's highly unlikely that the government would agree to this caretaker government arrangement, to an early election. I mean, it's a year away at this point. The elections are scheduled for a year away, and my sense is that the government is going to do everything it can to ensure that it can stay in power, and that could entail more of the crackdowns that it has used over the years to try to manage the opposition that's flared up. I mean, the last few years have been relatively quiet. There haven't been all that many street protests. One reason for that, certainly, the economic successes are a factor there, but also this government has cracked down very hard on the opposition parties to the point that they became quite weak and didn't have the capacity to stage sustained protests. So that's an important factor to keep in mind as well.
So Abu Bakr, I mean, it doesn't look like there's a lot of prospect for dialogue here. As Michael was saying, it's highly unlikely the government would call for an early election that might not work in its best interest. So where does that leave you and BNP?
Okay, let me respond to what the Awami League representative has said about Jamaat-e-Islami. I think that is clearly self-denial. The movement for caretaker government, what I mentioned and that Amir Mahmud has mentioned, it started from the parliament. Jamaat and Awami League jointly held a press conference. Mr. Shah Ali Farhad can go and check. I can tell that this is the evidence. You can go and check. The movement has started from the parliament. They had a joint conference in the parliament. He can Google it now. And then BNP and Jamaat and Awami League jointly went to the street for the restoration of democratic caretaker system in Bangladesh. So he should not deny the facts. That is the facts. And we have heard from the independent expert, Mr. Michael, what he said, that government, there was no space for the opposition or the people to go to the street. Now, people do not have options. They need to get their rights back. Their fundamental rights of voting has been taken away. The rule of system, as I said, the International Crisis Group has said that criminal justice system is being used to punish the opposition. So there is no rule of rule of law. There is no justice. There are gross human rights in violation in Bangladesh. So people are in the streets to get their rights back. And nowhere in the history that people's movement fail. And I can tell you for sure, I think Mr. Amir Mahmud will agree with me, the people who are in the street, they are not all members of the opposition. Okay. There are people, there are ordinary citizens of the country who, being deprived of their democratic rights, they are in the street, they are supporting BNP and Jamaat. So they are for their rights. And people's movement never gets failed, and they will succeed, no matter what.
Amir Chowdhury, I mean, how far will you have to go then? Do you fear further arrests, this crackdown getting even more severe? Will the BNP keep pushing? Will people really have to sacrifice to continue with these demands?
I think this ruling regime have already killed hundreds of people through enforced disappearance, through extrajudicial killing, through custodial death, and 4 million over people are facing false and fabricated cases. People have not given up. They are on the street. They have killed recently 13 people. Awami League representative is saying the government is allowing a free movement of for the meetings. But I can tell you, 11 people they have killed over the last few weeks. 11 people, and they have tried everything to stop these rallies. They have stopped public transportation. They have attacked people's houses, ransacked houses, and put in jail hundreds of people, thousands of people. So these rallies do not take place. But these rallies, nevertheless, took place with hundreds of thousands of people on the street, and it is growing, and it is going to end with the fall of this government, with the caretaker government in place, and people of Bangladesh will have a government who will be answerable to the citizens of the country, who will be responsible and answerable to the citizens of the country, because there is people had enough, and on top of that, they have emptied the coffer of the state through corruption. $100 billion they have laundered outside Bangladesh. This is the report by Economic Intelligence Integrity based in Washington.
Shah Ali.
No, this is.
I understand, but we have 1 minute left. I'd just like to get one final...
I'm finishing. Every day passing, Bangladesh people are not going to allow an illegal, unelected government to rule them in the future.
Shah Ali Farhad, one minute for your final response. Go ahead.
Well, a lot of things have been said, and I don't think 1 minute is enough to cover all these points. I would just like to say that it's good that BNP has such confidence, and it's a bit rich coming from a BNP leader talking about corruption. I think he has a misunderstanding between capital flight and money laundering. He should ask about money laundering from his acting chief, Tariq Rahman, who has already been convicted of it after being deposed by the FBI. The fact remains that under BNP's rule, Bangladesh was described as the next Afghanistan. Bangladesh became a champion, the most corrupt country in the world for straight 5 years, according to the Transparency International. Bangladesh, there was state sponsorship. There was state sponsorship of terrorism. Mr. Chowdhury, let me finish. I didn't interrupt you. Let me finish.
You're lying.
There was state sponsorship. Of terrorist groups like Harkatul Jihad, Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, directly under the patronization of their acting chief Tariq Rahman, who basically ran
BNP Jamaat tried them and punished them. Yeah, BNP Jamaat tried them and punished those extremists.
About Tariq Rahman, there is no justice in the country. There is no judicial process. It is all dictated by your government. That is why people of the opposition
the FBI came from Washington to Dhaka to give evidence in 2 cases against Tariq Rahman, Khaleda Zia, and other members of the cabinet of BNP, Mr. Chowdhury's colleague.
Unfortunately, it's impossible to hear the guest panelists speaking over each other, and that is very unfortunately...
Your leader had more corruption cases than Begum Zia, remember?
Calm down, Mr. Chowdhury. We could have had a good conversation, but you just spoiled it.
Okay, and that's going to have to be the final word. I apologize to our other panelists for not getting some last thoughts in, but that is all the time we have for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all 4 of you so much for being with me, and of course our viewers for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we'll see you next time.